here yet. Why aren't I appearing? My camera. Start my video.
Oh, hi, Sandra.
Oh, there I am, finally. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sandra.
Good morning, everyone, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's 6 p.m. here, so it's been a long day for me, but just bright and early there in Australia and in New Zealand. Thanks so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to use technology for the best to get us all connected and hearing from each other and talking together. Today we have Judy Horwith, Anna Brown, Sarah Ward, and Sandra Champion. 3 of them are joining us from Australia, and one, Sarah Ward, is joining us from New Zealand. I'm so happy to be here, and without further ado, we'll have the artists introduce themselves. Anna, would you like to go first? Say your name and where you're joining from.
Hi, my name is Anna Brown, and I live in a rural area on the east coast of Australia, about a 3-hour drive north from our capital city, Sydney. There are lakes to the north of me, the Pacific Ocean to the east, and a lot of bush to the south and west of me. So I basically live in the bush. I graduated from art college as a graphic designer, and my contact with textiles early at that stage was I did a lot of fabric printing as a major part of the course. I thought that would be the only way to work with textiles, though, in sort of fabric design. In the early 80s, I had the good fortune to live in Los Angeles, where I had my introduction to quilt making, basically, but more importantly, to see amazing quilt artists and seeing these pieces displayed in a different way than on the bed. I learned as many of the techniques as I could in quilt making. It was all a bit basic back then, mostly by hand. But when I returned to Australia, quilt making had really taken off in a big way at home as well. And I sort of developed my own style at this stage, and slowly opportunities opened up for us to exhibit our artworks in exhibitions, in galleries. And so I've basically been working as a textile artist since the early 90s. That's about it.
Thanks for joining us, Anna. So great.
All right.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Holly. Thank you for organising this, Holly, and to Dairy Barn also for doing this series. They're just wonderful. I've been watching them and they're fabulous. My name's Sandra Champion, and I live in Hobart, which is the capital of Tasmania. For a lot of you who don't know the geography of Australia, Tasmania is an island to the south of Melbourne, and it is a very beautiful island. It has a lot of indigenous flora and fauna, which is particular to Tasmania. It's a very beautiful island, and it has a lot of World Heritage areas.
Thanks, Sandra. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Holly. It's lovely to be here again. Thank you. This is wonderful. My name is Judy Horwith. I live in a small town on the southwest edge of Lake Macquarie, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney. It was a small down market town when I moved here 18 years ago with my husband, but it's now becoming much more developed. But very near me is a creek called Dora Creek, which has been the focus of a lot of my work over the last 18 years. But I have had diversions into other series of work, and this Adventure Journal number 7 is one of them. I first started making patchwork quilts. I fell in love with patchwork. I made my first patchwork quilt when I was 21 from leftover pieces from my dressmaking. The two things I failed at school was sewing and maths, which I think is hilarious now. But I think I inherited the genes from a grandmother and a great-grandmother who also made patchwork, even though I didn't know them. They were dead long before I was born, but it's somewhere there in the genes. I did go to art school when I was very young. I studied drawing. Drawing and line are my main elements in my work. And then I started making patchwork quilts, not long after that. And I just fell in love with the tactility of the form and the way that you could express ideas through it. So I had to teach myself to sew. And it sort of went from there. I became really involved in the late 70s in what was just starting up in Sydney in terms of people becoming interested in making quilts. And I joined a group. We had a little local group and it all went from there. So I actually started my studio practice in the mid-80s. A friend and I set up a business making quilts on commission for people. They were mainly traditional quilts, but we had a great deal of fun doing that. And at the same time, I was developing my own work. And over the last 35 years, I've actually written 3 books on designing for patchwork quilts, but I've also digressed into the sort of work that you see in front of you where I used to use commercial fabrics, but now I'm creating all my own fabrics from scratch. So that's where I started.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, good morning, Sarah. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sorry, the functions are a little bit different when you're sharing your screen, Holly. Yeah, I'm Sarah Ward from Auckland, New Zealand. So I live on the north side of the harbour in Auckland. So where I live is quite close to the very upper reaches of Auckland Harbour. And I learned to sew sort of at my mother's feet, if you like. And then I almost followed her into spinning and weaving for quite some time. And so I had a gift from my father for my 21st birthday was a loom, floor standing loom. So somewhere along the line, I got distracted into quilting, and I did some when I had, young children. But then what really started to take my interest was abstract quilts much later on. I'll tell you some more about that. I am not art trained. I work as a deputy principal of a primary school, or I guess you'd call it an elementary school maybe. So I have a full-on job, and very much quilting is my sort of weekend hobby. But I do have another time-intensive hobby, and that's to do with family history. So whilst I've been more involved and committed to it, which I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, I'm not a full-time artist, and I'm not art trained. So I'm just in awe of all you guys who have come to quilting from some art training or whatever. If you looked at my sketching, it's very poor. So that's where I'm at. So greetings from Auckland, New Zealand.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I would like each of you to tell us more about how you created this quilt, what the inspiration for your specific Quilt National piece is, any challenges that came about when you were creating it. Anna, would you mind going first?
Sorry, me, Anna?
Sure, yeah. Hi.
Oh, sorry, can't quite hear. Okay, now the bulk of my work over the past 20 years has been a large series of quilts based on the indigenous flora of the area, much like Sandra's work. But sort of more recently, after a period of prolonged drought and catastrophic fires in the area, I was aware really how the foliage around the lake had been impacted severely, and huge areas had been burnt out with skeletons of trees remaining only, which in turn changed all the colours on the water, and even the reflections and patterns had altered. So my quilt, Reflections 5, it tries to convey the harshness of this landscape in the aftermath of such devastation. And the sort of relentless sun that honestly during that period never disappeared. It was the days were long and hot. And anyway, I didn't I don't go into my quilts now, in quilt making nowadays, with a set design as I used to do. But I still choose an image from nature as a motive to start off the design process. And in this case, a simplified and stylized image of a plant in my garden was the original image I used, which I can show you some pictures of in a minute. And I chose silk rather than cotton for this because I had this sort of acidy sort of yellow that you know, the depth of its colour and vibrance was really what I was looking for in this piece. And it has sort of slightly more reflective qualities as well. So the techniques I use in my quilt making are very basic and very low tech, okay? There are probably easier ways of doing things nowadays, but for me, it's what works best, and it's quick for me. So I use raw edge reverse applique is the technique, and it is raw edge, but I can work very quickly with the fabric this way. And if I were to simply applique pieces or use some sort of you know, web or sticking process, I wouldn't be able to quilt it the way I like to quilt it at the end. So can you see into my studio? You can see me?
Yes.
Right, okay, so this is low tech. Okay, so if I can hold up sort of examples of how I started this piece. So I reverse applique, so which means I'm sure most of you know that this technique. So it's in this case, it's two pieces of fabric, the black and the lime put together, and on the back of it, in the case of this one, that's my motive, that I machine stitch onto the back through both layers, and then I flip it over and I cut from the black top and reveal the lime coloured motive, and then I did the same with the cream and the lime, and then I start to cut things up. I cut into strips and experiment with how it's going to be. This can take quite a while on the design wall, I can tell you. And then eventually with this, this way, I sort of had this sort of layout happening, and I realized I needed another piece of fabric to go in between to sort of give it a bit of relief and a bit more flow. So rather than make another piece of reverse applique, I actually found a commercial print that I could work with. I occasionally use them in my work, and And then I stitched it all together and put it away for a while. And then eventually I decided it really had to be cut again. So I actually cut through all of it again. And I can waste a lot of fabric this way, but I had to use this silk. I wasn't going to waste it. And slowly the design started to become more pleasing. I could get the flickering effect of the light across the water, the feeling of the sort of the starkness and harshness of what the area was like after the fires. So I machine pieced that all together, and then I hand quilt everything. That's the other thing I always do. It's it adds a lot of depth to my work, and it's also a very soothing part of the process for me. I really enjoy it. What else? Oh, that doesn't mean the quilt's often finished. I put it back on the design wall even after I've quilted it and bound it, and then I can applicate pieces over if I feel that it needs another link or another flow on the design. And that's basically the story of that quilt.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. It is beautifully hand quilted. It's truly a beautiful, amazing piece to study. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do have a question. This is kind of funny. I just recently started hand quilting, and I am just, I'm learning, I'm new at it, and I'm just so impressed by how well done your hand quilting is. Could you tell us how you learned that skill? Just through practice? And
well, when I first learned to hand quilt, which was in Los Angeles, I could use the tiniest needles and I could have the very finest stitches, okay, which I'm no longer capable of. And it's not now something that particularly matters, but because I've been doing it for so long, there's a rhythm as I do it, so that on the whole, the stitches are basically the same length. But if you look closely, they're not. But it doesn't matter, that's not what this piece is about, essentially. But the other thing I've found is I use a thin pellon usually as my batting material. It's not an iron-on one or anything. It's just a very fine pellon, which is very easy to quilt through. And the silk was beautiful to quilt through. It was like quilting through butter, honestly. It was just lovely. Yeah.
wow.
So it's just lots of practice, I think, and getting a rhythm going.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. The hand quilting really does add so much texture to the piece and to the
yeah, and I know you can do it with the machine just as well, but it's something I have not mastered. Yeah.
Well, great. If you have questions for the artists, please drop them in the chat box and I'll read them as we go. So Sandra, could you please tell us about your quilt?
Well, this quilt came about, it's really, it's as a result of the very catastrophic fires that Anna talked about, 2019-20 summer, but it really goes back a few years before that. A lot of people aren't aware that the precursor to those fires on the east coast of Tasmania really had their genesis in a couple of very devastating bushfires in Tasmania. One in the summer of 2016-17, where a very ancient alpine area that dated back to the Gondwana land was completely destroyed. It burnt for 2 weeks without any attempt to put it out. It was very close to the Cradle Mountain World Heritage Area. That area had 1,500-year-old pencil pines, 500-year-old cushion plants. And then the next year, there was a very large, devastating bushfire in the southwest of Tasmania, burnt a huge amount of World Heritage Area. Again, burnt for 2 weeks without any intervention at all. It covered Hobart in smoke for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then, so that was really a terrible thing for Tasmania and for people who are concerned about the environment of Tasmania, which I am and I have been for decades and decades. So when the East Coast fires started last year, it was just like a playback to what had happened in the previous summers in Tasmania. And I was so concerned, probably like Anna and Judy, every day you would see different vision. It wasn't the same vision every day. At the time, my daughter was in Italy and she said every day on the news in Italy, there would be different images of those fires, not the same thing over and over. This particular piece, Summer Inferno series is 15 in all. There are some that deal with the detritus that's left after the fire, as Anna talked about. The bits on the ground, the pieces of bark that are only half burnt. Then the vision that I found very affecting were the visions that came out of the East Coast, particularly further down south, on the Victorian-New South Wales border, where I was actually born, and I know that area around Malakuta. It's gorgeous, and those images of the people standing in front of houses which have been completely burnt, all that's left is corrugated iron, and then you'll have this beautiful paved terrace in front of the house. And I did a number in that series. This particular one that you're looking at on the screen was in reaction to the fires, particularly in the Blue Mountains in the World Heritage Area, which did enormous damage. And those, the vision of that was quite different from the others, where you had these enormous plumes of flame coming down the mountain through these beautiful eucalypts, and that's what I tried to portray in that particular piece. In that Summer Inferno series, I started, one day I picked up a piece of cardboard and I thought, you know, this just reflects all that corrugated iron roofing that you see day after day. So I got into using corrugated cardboard in all forms. I'm still going through it at present. Also, there's a lot of paper in my work. When I went to, I was brought up in a family where I was introduced to textiles very early. I always used my mother's sewing machine. I sewed. I could never embroider. I knitted, crocheted. I came from a family which had a strong line of arts. My grandfather was a sculptor, and made a living from his sculpting, which is a fairly unusual thing to be doing in the 1920s. He's probably best known for his work on the Capitol Theatre, which was designed by Walter Burley Griffin, who worked for Frank Lloyd Wright in America. And won the award to design our capital, Canberra. But Burley Griffin, prior to doing the Canberra work, did a lot of work in Melbourne, which is well known to Melburnians, but the Capitol Theatre is very special. And my grandfather worked on the ceiling of that, which is quite beautiful. So when I went to art school, I had this background, this life of working in textiles, and I thought, oh, I might try something different. So they don't like you using textiles at art school, where I went to art school. So everyone's nodding probably. I adhered paper to textile and treated the paper surface like a textile. So that's going back, 40, 50 years. I worked in that way, and I've loved working with paper textile ever since. I've used the Airmail Manchester Guardian, fused that onto a silk organza and used that for a long while. Now I tend to work in deconstructed papers a lot. I was given, if I show on the screen, I was given a huge amount of old newspapers. Here we go. From the 1950s. They're a little bit precious, as you can see, and they fall apart very easily. You have to be careful with them. I tend to back them with scrim, or the scrim if I'm cutting them. If I'm tearing them, I back them with tea bag paper. And because they've got these gorgeous lines on them, they're great for stitching and getting lines in your work. I also do quite a lot of soaking of papers. This one's quite a rusted piece. I soak glossy lift outs from the newspapers. This one shows a glossy mag that I like soaking them for a long while, because the print deconstructs, you can probably see there. So I start off with quite a deconstructed piece of paper. If I feel as though it's not going to handle stitching very well, I'll back it with tea bag paper again, or scrim. I tend to adhere it with CMC paste, which is a safe paste. I can use it in the kitchen. It's a product that's used in cake decorating. And so I figure I can slop that round in the kitchen and nothing much is going to happen to any of us. And that then allows me to work with the paper, and then I do a lot of painting on it. I use golden paints because they're environmentally safe. I'm not into dyes anymore. I used to use dyes a lot. I don't do any dyeing at all now. I only use stuff that's environmentally safe for me to use. I do with my corrugated cardboard, I quite often start with this sort of approach, where I'll gesso it and use a Quink ink over the top of the gesso. Quink ink and the salt. The salt just cures the Quink ink, and you end up with quite lovely effects happening. Sometimes I'll paint over that again. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I throw it out. The other day we had 100-kilometre-an-hour winds at our place, and all my cardboards that were out in the back patio flew away somewhere. I don't know where they've gone. this is another piece. That's sometimes where I start as well, with something like that. So when I'm just going across to get another piece. This is a piece that's from the magazine that I showed you. So I end up with pieces like that that have got bits of rust on them, bits of grot, as you can see, they're quite grotty. So I backed that with some scrim. I used the CMC paste again just to back it on the back. That means I can paint into it and it doesn't fall apart as easily. Sometimes I like papers that do fall apart because I like the, in my piece that was in Quilt National 19 behind me, I like the ragged edge on papers when they've been soaked for a while because they tend to collect the rust as well. So if I show you what shows these, I've changed after the Summer Inferno series. I got a bit sick of cardboard, and so I started working with scrim, which I've always loved. And so this is a current work that is in progress at present, and it's a reaction to not being able to, well, particularly Tasmanians, we couldn't leave the state. We were severely locked down all of last year and pretty much all of this year too. We can't go anywhere. So I walk around a lot, and I've taken an interesting concrete footpaths and the lines and cracks that appear. I love, like Anna, I love hand stitching. I'm an appalling hand stitcher, but I love doing it. And I in all my previous works, I stitch into silk because it's particularly a satin weave silk, because it's easy to get the needle in and out. If it's just a 2-shaft weave, it's much harder to get the needle in and out, and it's more tiring. But now I've started moving into, or at the moment, using scrim and not stitching as much. Using papers, getting back into papers. I love painting papers. I love painting, paint. So thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Sandra. It's so funny you mentioned the corrugated cardboard, and of course that's what it is. I've been looking at the quilt so much, thinking, how did she get that texture and I know you use paper. How did you do that in paper? It's the cardboard. You've really altered it and disguised it and made it unrecognizable. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One question someone asked is, what do you mean by soaking your paper? What do you soak it in? How do you do that?
Well, in Australia, and I think the New York Times, those sort of papers are the same. On Saturdays, they have a glossy mag that comes as an inset in the newspaper. And it's very serendipitous, and it depends on the print and the factory that it gets printed in, the sort of paper that they're using. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. Like this piece I showed you, which deconstructed beautifully. So I put them into just a crate, a plastic crate. I might chuck in some rust as well, and put a brick on top of it, fill it up with water, and leave it for a couple of months maybe. I have a little look every now and then. Nothing's happening, I give it a twirl around, put it on the clothesline, dry it out, put it back. So that's what I mean by deconstructing.
Nice.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Sandra. Judy, let's hear a bit from you.
Okay. Well, my quilt, which I can't see at the moment, is it? You? Okay. It's called Adventure Journal number 7 on the Silk Road, and this series of quilts came about because of some of the wonderful journeys that my sister and I have taken over the last 12 years. And after my husband died, he hated traveling, but my sister and I have had some amazing journeys together. And unfortunately, due to lockdown, we haven't been able to travel for the last couple of years, which is very hard. But my first journey one of the journeys that I did in 2012 was from St. Petersburg across the Trans-Siberian Railway through Mongolia to China, which was just an eye-opening adventure. And then the following year, we went from Beijing back across to Western China, through Western China into the stands, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and back up into Russia. And we've also done other trips in that part of the world as well. And when I travel, I keep a daily journal when I travel, but I don't do any drawing, but I take my camera and I take literally thousands of photographs. And I'm very interested in taking, I take the usual happy snaps of where I am, but I like to take details of things. And the things that interest me are pattern, colour, texture, and line, which is, it's lines of underpins most of my work. And I don't know whether I can actually manage to do this, but if I go into my share screen, I've got a couple of images of the sort of things I take. Here we go. Now, I haven't done this before, so I'm not sure what I have to do. Where are we? Do I just click on share?
Yes.
No?
There we go.
No?
We can see your screen now.
You can see my screen. I can't see it.
Oh.
I don't know what to do now.
We see your Zoom web page.
I'm looking for my I've got a PowerPoint presentation there, but I can't see anything on my screen. So what if I stop share?
Yeah, stop your sharing and then
Stop my share. I'll just have to talk about it.
Well, if you pull up the PowerPoint and then click screen share again, I think it might work.
Okay. Oops. Now have you got all my attempts at technology are hopeless. Now I've lost you.
We still have you.
Screen. Share screen. It's still. Can you see that?
Not yet.
No.
You want to click it again? Or we can go on without it, whichever you prefer.
Okay, I will just I don't know what to do about this now. Okay, so I'll just go back to where I was. Ooh. So all of my plans that I made yesterday about how you were going to see all this stuff, it doesn't seem to be working. Anyway, so what I do is I take literally thousands of photographs of details of things. I'm very interested in walls and textures and anything that's got the mark of human intervention. I'm interested in aging walls. I'm interested in walls that are painted and graffiti and anything that shows the mark that somebody was there and did something to a surface. And so this particular quilt is really based on those sort of images. And the way I go about it is I was very fortunate to have a wonderful class at QSDS a couple of years ago. I'd been working with discharged fabrics and painting on fabrics, and I'd done a little bit of mono printing, not a huge amount. And I did a couple of classes, one with Kevin Womack and one with Pat Pauly, because I had these ideas, but I didn't quite know how I was going to get them out and how I was going to make them. And I came home from those two classes really on a roll with, I was sure now of what I could do and how I could do it. And so what my process is to sort of to think about what aspect of this journey and particular parts of it that I wanted to express. And so I set about making a whole lot of fabric based on the theme, and doing large monoprints, which I really love monoprinting because I love the serendipity nature of it. I love the fact you don't know exactly what you're going to get. I love it when the ink drips and the paint drips and you get unexpected things happening. So I make a large amount of fabric. When I think I've got enough, I then start to put pieces up on the design wall and play around with the composition. And this is a very simple quilt. It's only got 6 pieces of fabric in it. And to me, it's like a portal. It's a bit like looking through a door into the past. A lot of these cultures and civilizations that we've travelled through are so foreign to where I live and what I know, and the history of my country and colonisation. So to go to these places that are, their civilization is thousands of years old, we're never going to know about them. So I'm sort of just looking in and responding to what I see. So in this particular piece, there's a lot of China in this quilt. I'm not interested in creating direct representations of anything. It was really just to create a mood. And I can look at the details of photographs I've taken and know where I was at the time, sometimes more so than looking at a landscape of something. So it really sort of gets into my psyche, this sort of introspective look at things. The quilt is quilted with 1 centimetre grid, which represents the sort of the degrees of latitude and longitude, I suppose. But the techniques, I mean, on the panel on the left, it's soy wax resist. In the centre of the top panel, it's a large monoprint that's been painted. I use permaset printing inks, and I've been using some Procyon dyes. I'm still not au fait with Procyon dyes. I'm still a little bit hesitant about them, although I'm using them more, but I do like the permaset fabric inks. The right-handed panel, the image was taken from a door in Uzbekistan. It was a fabulous iron door. And the bottom left panel is very sort of similar to the texture on a huge bronze and brass urn that I saw in Beijing. And so all of those other motifs are sort of the adaptations of things that I have seen. I like my quilts to be fairly simple in the piecing. I'm not into very elaborate piecing. I like the impact of large pieces of work. I love the process of the collaging of pieces of fabric together to get a composition that I'm happy with. And even though this is a simple piece with 6 fabrics, I can't tell you how long it took to get those 6 pieces of fabric together to work. So that's basically what it is in this particular quilt. and it's my 8th time in Quilt National, and I am really thrilled to be included again.
Thanks, Judy. I have a question. After you decide which pieces of fabric go together to create the composition, do you then add any more ink or dyes to it after that point, or do you only work with the fabrics that you've already printed on?
Usually I only work with the fabrics I've printed on, although a piece I did recently, I did have to add some more to it because the line, it just wasn't quite right. It wasn't. And I did a bit more drawing on it after it was pieced.
Okay. Yeah, this piece, as I'm looking at it now, I'm thinking about how you composed it, and the red line that sort of goes down right down the center and then swoops towards the bottom. It just looks so perfectly placed and composed with the two pieces together.
Oh, thank you. It was serendipity.
Oh, good. Wow. Oh, it's beautiful. And the quilting on this, I think, is pretty unique. I don't know that I've seen any other mini, or at least mini quilts that are in such a fine grid like that. And I'm sorry, did you touch on it and say that's what you think is representing longitude and latitude?
Yeah. When I was thinking about how to quilt, because I don't do free motion quilting, I'm hopeless. I can't really do it. So I put the walking foot on my machine, and I'm pretty much a straight line quilter. And I was thinking about how to quilt these pieces because I wanted to do a lot of quilting on it. But I wanted the quilting to create an overall texture to the pieces as well. So yes, latitude and longitude, where in the world is this? Yeah.
I think it also adds a nice structure, sort of referencing what you said about, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but something about the human nature rubbing, like creating the textures that you're inspired by. And that grid is so man-made, if you will. It sort of references the structure and the deconstruction at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really what it is about. And yeah, I like that. I use an overall stitching a lot in my work now, whether it's stick, what do you call it, matchstick quilting. I just like that overall texture. I like the way it's sort of sometimes it can be a veil between the work and the viewer as well. So there's sort of interesting aspects of that sort of quilting. I mean, it's very tedious. It drives me crazy, and it's much more difficult than it looks. You know, getting it square is just, it does my head in. But anyway, I persevere.
Do you start, this silly question, do you start in the center with your quilting line?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, as I'm thinking about it, it does seem like it'd be quite challenging.
It is, and it's, you know, on a large quilt, it really is. It's quite, yes, it's surprising how much the fabric moves, even though, you know, you don't think it's going to. It's been basted or pinned within an inch of its life, but it still does things that you don't want it to do.
Oh yeah, embrace the material for what it is, I suppose. All right, well, thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Would you like to tell us more about your piece?
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. I've forgotten if I'd turned it on. So I did a few traditional quilts and then got interested. I've always known I'm more interested in things abstract. So that includes my choice of printed fabrics. And I started collecting Quilt National books in 2003. So, can you stop just sharing the photo for a minute, Holly? So here's my first Quilts National book, which I thought to get off the, and so I kind of regard finally, and having been inspired by all those years and collected all the books, to now be, a participant in this is a great honour. So I had the opportunity to visit the dairy barn for Quilt National 19 on our first big overseas trip, actually to go to our son's graduation in New York. So we kind of made a thing of it. But I'd say that the way my quilting first changed direction was in 2004. Nancy Crowe held an exhibition at Auckland Museum of her pieces, and they were hung in a gallery with, very tall concrete walls and everything. It was such a different visual impact of her pieces, and I thought, wow. And what I really loved about those pieces was the way that you would have to read the artist statement to figure out what they, what her what her inspiration was. But I really was challenged by those. And at that time, I had I'd won a voucher for a Bernina shop that was a quilting supplier near me. And through a quilt exhibition, I'd got this voucher. And my sister said to me, you know what, you want to just think about what you're going to spend that voucher on. Buy something you've never bought before. So I was very taken by that idea, and I decided I would go and buy fabrics plain fabrics that I would never have had in my stash prior to that. So then I had to challenge myself to figure out, well, what am I going to do with plain fabrics? I know what Nancy does with them, but I can't figure out what to do with them myself. So, but over time, I did a class with someone in New Zealand, which was all about, taking an artist's work and drilling down an artist's palette of colours or design things. And I got quite interested in Huntavasa, and that gave me a road into my first piece using plain fabrics. So then serendipity stepped in, and my friend Kathy Ansto, who I see in this meeting, she somehow managed to persuade Nancy to come to New Zealand and run some workshops. So since 2011, she's visited 4 times. So I've done a week workshops at each of those times, and that's been a real changer into what I'm doing. So primarily I'm working with plain fabric still, but I love to digress and put in prints, but you'll see that they're always geometric type prints or textures. So I really love the textures in your pieces, Judy, and one day I might go back to doing some of that stuff. So in preparation for going to Nancy Crowe workshops, one of the other attendees, another one of my friends, and I taught each other to dye fabric, because there was no way we could, afford the amount of fabric that you needed to cart to a workshop. So we went down that rabbit hole, if you like. I haven't been down that rabbit hole very much in recent years, but that was a good way to feel like I had a reasonable stash of fabric. So I'm mostly work from photos and visual stimuli, and sometimes of nature, but I'm also really attracted when looking at lines and shapes in architectural or human-made things is where I often end up if I'm looking for something. Although the pieces that I'm been working on at the moment with the sort of circular, curvy sort of pieces, they've all been based on a photograph that I'd taken of some stones that had been stacked up on a beach, and sort of almost like a cairn. And so that's where I have started being much more interested in curves and working with them. So I piece all those curves, they're not applique. And so turning now to just talk a little bit about my piece, Disrupted Stones. Holly, can I share my screen, please? I've got to get my photos and I'll share screen. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, gee. Right, now how do I get back into share screen? Going to have the same trouble as you, Judy. So
I'm totally inept.
I've got a PowerPoint and now I need to get back into share screen in the
Do you see the option?
It was tricky. Pardon me?
Do you see the option in your Zoom window?
Yes, share screen, but it's not sharing the PowerPoint. Done.
I'm not totally sure. Usually when you click share screen, an option shows what part of the screen to share.
Oh, here we go.
There you go.
Oh, no, I don't want to share any of those. Goodness. This is weird. Oh no, maybe I'm not going to be able to do that. A little bit late. What am I here? No. No, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do that, which is disappointing, seeing I had it all there ready, like you, Judy.
Yes.
No, never mind. Okay, so I have got some other things nearby. So I start with for this piece, Disrupted Stones, I started with the photo, and I'd been working with stones. Perhaps if I turn my camera around, you'll see another piece in that series. So I'm in my studio, and the other end of the room is my husband's office. So that piece there was the first piece, one of the first pieces, one of the biggest pieces, with the curved shapes as stones. And then over on the far wall there's another there's another piece there that above the chair that again is the idea of the stones, and that was playing with print fabrics as well. So round on this side I've got my design wall, and I've got a couple of pieces on there that I'm just about to I'm partway through quilting. So what I do is I start with a sketch or a block, and so if I just hold up my notebook here is the secondary way to do all this. So I kind of had this this thing here, and I started fiddling around with coloured pencils. It's not usually the way I go, but I then developed into a black, white and grey piece. And I guess that with working through Nancy, I've learned to, or I'm still in the process of learning really, of looking at colours purely as values. So when I can't figure out how much contrast there is in a piece, I do get out my phone and just look at it, through a tonal thing. So from one piece like this, I then put up on the wall some colours and make a first block. That's what I did for this piece anyway, was to make one motif in some colours, and I had a whole palette of colours over there under that big piece. I have a secondary table, and I lay out heaps of colours that I think I might use. So I store all my fabrics in bins and boxes, which are actually under my sewing table, and I pull them all out, and they really get in the way while you're at that phase of sort of pulling fabrics, and then you think you've got a gazillion things, and then you still end up diving back into them. So from that starting point of the one block and the black, white and grey, everything's then freehand rotary cut. So I would just cut the curve that I like the look of, and then of course I need to cut the matching curve ready for piecing. So I have, say, a curved piece, and then I have to cut another piece that's a little bit bigger, has a seam allowance added into it, so that I can then piece the two curves together. So what I've been learning in recent workshops with Nancy is really about trying to get a variety and tension between your shapes and your backgrounds. And in disrupted stones, as in the piece that's further around on my other wall that I referred to earlier, that one, both of them you'll see have, I start thinking about the background and the shading of the background. So on both those pieces, I've sort of gone from a dark to light gradation, and then I've looked at the contrast of the motifs that overlay that gradation. So I'm thinking about dark, light and medium and all that sort of thing. So I do a lot of standing back from my design wall. So I've got about probably 3 meters, 4 meters space. So, I do a lot of standing back and just squinting at things, and then if I'm working in the evening, I turn the lights off and have a look at it in dimmed light and just see what pops out, because that's always, a little bit different. I do a lot of pinning up of different options. I'm not sure if I've got any photos in my book, seeing I can't get the PowerPoint. Yes, I can. So here's some photos I took throughout the making process. And so at different stages, you can see, I've put a bit of this, a bit of that in, and then taken it out. And then down here, I'm sort of working on another lot of options and just pinning up heaps and heaps of colours, just to get, what I think I'm looking for. So whilst I have a motif in my head, and then I had put a layout on the wall. So this is something that I learned with Nancy. So you might not be able to see so easily on here. Oh yes, on here you can see some sort of black lines there. So I use a grid on the wall of, strips of black, thinly cut black fabric to make a layout. So I kind of had a basic idea about the shapes and sizes of each block, and it roughly worked out this time. And so the finished piece, I had some photos of in my PowerPoint, which is not going to work, but anyway, so that's the finished piece, and you won't see from this, but there's 2 layers of quilting. So the first is it was horizontally quilted with in fact, maybe you go back to the screen, your screen of the actual piece, Holly. Yeah, so you can see there from the detail on the right that it's been overall quilted, not in straight lines, but sort of, meandering lines. So that's all over, first of all. And then I work here in my studio on my domestic machine. So I start from the center, and I work out towards the edges. So that's quite a task, because it's a reasonably big piece. And then I have free motion quilted over the top with a thicker thread. So I like to, on a few of my pieces, I've been exploring this idea. It's quite hard work free motion quilting in a big piece, but I'm getting better at it. And so for that, you might notice that I've sort of picked up almost a, I've echoed the shapes in the actual free motion quilting. So I work alone in my studio, but I do belong to a group of quilters in Auckland. Of course, that's a group that has a great, variety of different people, but there's one or two others who've attended Nancy Crow workshops with me, and that's great. So, we tune in with each other. And then in New Zealand, the New Zealanders and Australians who have come to workshops here with Nancy, we've had a couple of group exhibitions at a gallery and then associated with our quilt symposiums in New Zealand. So that's basically my piece, and I'm very delighted to be in Quilt National and to join you all in this forum. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Just checking the chat box. Looks like we have a question. Sarah, what kind of thread have you used to quilt? Is it invisible or a light color?
No, the initial quilting is just in a cotton thread, a regular cotton thread. And then over the top I use, a heavy Wonderful brand thread. I think it's about a 12 weight.
So interesting, the just imagining you moving. This piece is huge. I mean, if you've seen the installation images online or if you've seen it in person, this quilt really is massive. It's so impressive to think about you free motion quilting those black quilt lines.
Yeah.
Wow. Great. So we have some. Thank you, Sarah. I'm gonna add a spotlight to all the other artists. Let's see. Oh, and myself. Okay, great. I'll stop the screen share. So if we had a few questions for the other artists. My computer, I'm sorry, we have to give it a moment. It's a touch screen and the cursor sometimes stops wanting to work when I touch the screen. It's very frustrating. Anna, we had a couple questions for you. When you do your quilting, do you use a hoop? How do you get the right tension? How many stitches do you do at once?
Oh, I use a frame, a rectangular frame, plastic. So the tension varies. I can loosen it easily if I get to a thick piece that I need to manipulate, but usually it's fairly taut. I can't use a hoop. I find that quite restrictive. But how many stitches? Gosh, I mean, it's a running stitch, I guess. I do a couple. I don't know. I will check. I just don't know. I probably 3 or 4. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an automatic thing. I can do it watching the television. Okay. So yeah, great. I can't tell you. Yeah. And we had it's not one at a time.
Right.
Yeah.
And someone says your studio, let's see, Anna's studio, the area behind her looks very interesting and inspiring. They said they would love to see more, but could you just tell us a little bit about your studio?
Well, it's a glorified sewing room, really. I have, I move myself. I don't know if you can see the unit in the center was specially made for me because I'm a very short person, and it's on casters and I can move it around, so it gives me a big table space when I'm pinning things together. It also moves apart, so I've got 2 separate tables, and I can store my quilts in the cavity in the centre, rolled up, which is really good, and my batting, things like that. My design wall over there with a quilt from an older, my Flora series hanging up there. And then, what can you see? And then my fabrics are in drawers underneath that section, and up in the bookcases as well. Got fabric everywhere. A lot of prints from the old days that I don't quite know what to do with, but I have them all. I do still make the odd patchwork quilt, but for family and friends. But mostly plains now, and I do have a sink and a small wet area with a table that I double up as a cutting table, and then I can move it around and use it when I'm printmaking and things like that. But only small, I just do small pieces occasionally. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. A question I have for all of you, or any of you, for those of you who work in a series or have worked in series, could you please tell us a little more about how your series has evolved, maybe specifically over the past 1.5 years, or the lifetime of working in this series, whichever. And then if you've closed a series, if you've ended it, how have you made that decision that the series was finished and you could put that to rest?
I always work in a series. I like working in a series because it allows you to explore different techniques, different colours. So my button grass series came about because I was walking in on the overland track in the Cradle Mountain National Park, and I love button grass. They're just the most beautiful plant, and they're an important plant in carbon sequestration. So you can look at whole swathes of them and you know they're doing us good. That series, I let that go because I loved working the way I did with that series, but my physio put a stop to that and said, when you come back to me, you're going to give me some other way that you're going to work. So I had to leave button grass. One morning I threw my dog's ball into the river just down at the end of the road, and she disappeared around the corner, and I thought, where's she gone? You can't go round there. And so I followed her round, and a couple of times a year this grotty old seawall is exposed because the tide goes way, way, way out. And this wall originates from the 1820s, when there was a very vibrant shipbuilding yard in that area, produced hundreds of boats each year. And this grotty bit of wall is extant from that period. I loved the seawall series because I was really able to get into the grottiness of it all. That went to about 15. And then the Summer Inferno series, like Anna, really came about as a reaction to last year. In between series, I muck around with other things, you know, something just comes to me, like when I saw this wall when I was throwing my dogs, that's it. So it'll just come. And then in the meantime, I just muck around with other things and try different techniques, rust a bit more paper. And currently I'm starting on this Imagine Places series that might go somewhere, might end up in the bin. So that's me.
I've always worked in series too, from the mid-80s onwards. And I don't think the series I work on are mutually exclusive either. this series of adventure journal quilts, I also explored and had a solo show a few years ago with my first lot of quilts that I made in response to travel. So this second series it's sort of been there in the back of my mind, and it just needed to be made. It wouldn't go away. But for the last 18 years, I've been working on quilts about Dora Creek, which, as I said earlier, is very near my home. But those, I think, in the Blackwater series, which was very interested in the creek and the natural bush surrounds. The Blackwater series, I think I went to 32 quilts in that series. And then I've had Rainy Day Dora Creek series, where I've had a number of quilts. And then the creek drawing series, I think, is up to about number 17 or 18. So I find that I have more ideas than time to do everything I want to do. So, I mean, the last 2 years, I've been making the adventure journal quilts, but I've also been working on quilts about Dora Creek. So I can do both, and I like to do both. Yeah, I think that, you know, if people look at my early work, they might think there's a huge difference between what I was making in the mid-80s, say, and now, you know, 35, 40 years later. But in fact, I think every single piece you make is related one to the other. Each one feeds into the next. And you might even go back to something you were doing years ago, because that inspiration or that idea is still sort of churning around in your mind somewhere. So I think that for me, it's a continuum. And you know, people might see a quilt that I've made in 1986 or one I've made in 1993. I mean, my first national quilt in 1993 was a pieced patchwork quilt. But there are still elements of that quilt in the terms of the way I choose colour, the way I'm interested in line, even though it was made with commercial fabrics. The way I chose those fabrics was really about line and pattern, and I'm still working with line and pattern and still using that same sort of colour palette as well. So I think you might look at something and say, oh, but I mean, she's jumped all over the shop. But you're not looking at I've made hundreds of quilts. Then you're not looking at all of the quilts that have gone between those quilts. So to me, it's very interesting. It's just an ongoing element in my work. I know it's there.
Yeah, great.
Mine would be much the same. So we sort of started off together anyway, way back, Judy and I.
And we have to say, I mean, we also, Anna and I were instrumental in getting the first exhibition of art quilts happening in Australia back in 1991. It was the first time quilts had been shown in a gallery. So we were pretty thrilled about that, weren't we?
We were.
Wow.
We still are. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So my series work much the same way as Judy said. Mine were all based on natural forms. Eventually I did piece quilts to begin with, and then always in my own sort of colour palette, okay, which usually wasn't very traditional. And then I moved on to, I think it was a strata series, a landform series, and I would have probably done only about 10 or 15 quilts in each of those, but always ready to get onto the next sort of thread. And when I started with the flora, I must have 40 or 50 quilts in that series under various headings of looking at canopy or bark or trees, or just sort of various categories within that. It's endless. So I still dip back to that occasionally, but reflections with the bushfires has been the latest focus, and I'll continue with that. The first in that series were very calm. And in the first quilt I had in Quilt National 2017, it was quite a calm quilt, and it was the colours at dusk, and yeah, it's become quite radical since then. But anyway, that's it.
Mm. So I feel like the rookie here in terms of working in a series, because this is really my first series about the stones. So yeah, I don't know when it's going to finish because I haven't been there before. But I guess I work. I'm quite a tidy worker, and I like to finish a piece completely and then tidy up and put it away and then move on to other things. So unlike you, I think, Judy, I can't think ahead to 3 other things coming up at the same time. I have to, just stick in the zone where I'm going. And yeah, so I'm not really sure where I'm going in terms of possible future series, but I have been encouraged to try working in a series and to develop it until you feel like you've got to the end of that. And so that's what I'm currently doing.
Oh, that's great. Could you tell us more about your family project that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I guess other than my abstract quilts, the other things that have mostly inspired me have been family history, sort of commemorative quilts. I've done one to do with my parents, and one to do with my grandfather and his 2 brothers that went to the First World War, and so some war themed things. So our trip to America was we also did in that same extended trip, we also went to First World War sites and found graves and did all that sort of thing. So there are some things mainly around family history that I've tried to present in a visual way. So that would be my other main inspiration, other than photos of things in nature or things in buildings or man-made landscapes.
Interesting. Do any of you, we have a few minutes left, do any of you have questions or comments for each other?
Oh, Sandra, I'd like to just let you know how much I love your work.
Oh, thank you, Judy. I just do what I do, and I can't sew a straight line, and I can't embroider, so I just muck around with stuff. And
the piece that you've got in Quilt National this time, it really gets into here, because I was very fortunate that the fires weren't near me in that awful summer, but it has affected. I have done work about the fires myself, and because we couldn't do anything else, but it was on the news all the time and every day, and you could see the smoke hanging in the air. So it really, really appeals to me, and yeah, and it's really nice to meet you, Sarah, and to see what you're doing, and of course it's lovely to see you, Anna, as usual.
So Judy, I just wanted to comment that many, many years ago, I think my very first quilt class was one that you ran at the Aotea Centre in Auckland.
Oh, really? That one?
Around 2000 or 2000?
Oh, no, yeah, 1999, 2000, something like that.
1999, okay. So there we are. I took a day off. Teaching to come to your workshop, and it was great fun. And it's great to see where your journey has ended up now, because what we were doing back then in that class was quite different.
It was collage, wasn't it? Collage class?
No, I don't think it was collage. I think it was strip piecing or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've always worn 2 hats, because a lot of my work was based on designing for patchwork quilts. And
well,
yeah.
Mm.
So, but that's great fun too. I enjoy doing that. Yeah. had a fabulous and very enjoyable teaching career. Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful. Well, great. If there's any more comments or questions. Well, thank you all for joining us. It's only Thursday evening here, but I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I think this was a great start to the weekend. So thank you all for joining us. This will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can subscribe at youtube.com/Dairy Barn Art Center. And thank you. Happy quilting.
Thank you, Holly,
Thank
for
Holly.
inviting us to do it. It's been great fun.
Lovely.
Thanks,
Yes,
Holly.
thank you.
Thank you. You're
okay,
welcome.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.